My wedding didn't end with a kiss. It ended with me, in a $5,000 gown, raising my hand in the middle of a packed cathedral and systematically detonating the lives of my fiancé and my own sister. I was supposed to be the blushing bride. Instead, I became the executioner. My life with Ethan felt like it had been scripted by Hollywood, the kind of story that makes even the most cynical people reconsider the idea of soulmates. We were two transplants in the concrete canyons of Chicago, a city that can feel isolating if you don't have an anchor. We found that anchor in each other. He was a shark in the world of finance, a junior partner at a prestigious firm on Wacker Drive, with a disarming smile and eyes the color of aged bourbon that promised both wild adventures and quiet stability. I was a painter, channeling the chaos and beauty of the city onto canvas, and he was my favorite muse. Our love story spanned 5 years, a tapestry woven from shared deep dish pizzas on rainy nights, battling over the Sunday Tribune crossword, and whispered promises of forever as the L train rumbled past our apartment window. He was my calm in the city's relentless storm. When he got down on one knee at the top of the John Hancock Center, with the entire glittering grid of Chicago stretching out beneath us and our families waiting at a restaurant below, it felt like the final piece of my life had just been placed, creating a perfect, beautiful picture. The wedding planning was a blur of consultations, vendor meetings, and fabric swatches. It was a beautiful, stressful whirlwind. Ethan was incredibly involved, offering his opinion on everything from the font on the invitations to the string quartet's set list, and right there with me, every step of the way, was my younger sister, Chloe, my maid of honor, my shadow, my confidant. She was the one who patiently zipped up a dozen gowns before we found the perfect one, a classic charmeuse silk dress that felt like it was made for me. She threw me an epic bachelorette weekend in Nashville, a blur of cowboy boots and laughter. Whenever the pressure mounted, she was the one who would grab my hand, look me in the eye, and promise that it would all be worth it, that it would be the most perfect day imaginable. Looking back at the pictures from that time, at her beaming smile and unwavering support, is like rewatching a thriller when you already know who the killer is. You see the clues everywhere. The monster was never lurking in the dark. She was smiling at me from the front row. The night my universe cracked open was a Thursday, just 2 days before the wedding. We were in the final stretch, a frenzy of last-minute details. Ethan had been working late all week, claiming he was closing a massive deal for his firm. I'd spent the day with my mom, finalizing the seating chart and picking up my altered gown. I genuinely felt a wave of sympathy for him, trapped under fluorescent office lights while I was basking in the final moments of bridal anticipation. I decided to do something nice for him. I stopped by his favorite deli near his Lincoln Park apartment and picked up his go-to order, a massive pastrami on rye he adored and a bottle of expensive red wine. I pictured his tired face lighting up with a grateful smile, a quiet moment of peace for us before the beautiful chaos of the weekend began. I let myself into his sleek, modern apartment with my key. The familiar scent of his sandalwood cologne and old books usually felt like a warm hug. But tonight, something else was layered underneath it, a sweet, cloying fragrance. It was her perfume, a gardenia scent I had bought her for her last birthday. A heavy, cold dread began to pool in the pit of my stomach. I called out his name, my voice sounding fragile and foreign in the cavernous space. "Ethan, honey, I brought food." Silence. And then I heard it, a muffled giggle, a distinctly female sound that was not mine. The deli bag suddenly felt like it was made of lead. My mind scrambled, desperately trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe one of Chloe's friends was visiting. Maybe she was helping him wrap a surprise wedding gift for me. But I knew, in that deep animal part of your brain that smells danger before you can process it, I knew. I moved down the long hallway toward the master bedroom, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The door was ajar. Through the gap, I could hear their voices, hushed and intimate, the sound of shared secrets. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely push the door open. The scene that met me is burned into my memory like a brand. Ethan, my Ethan, was in our bed, his shirt tossed carelessly on a chair, and tangled in the sheets with him, her blonde hair spread across his pillows, was Chloe, my sister. They were so absorbed in each other they didn't see me standing there. The world went silent. The air turned thick and heavy, impossible to breathe. All I could see were their two forms, the living embodiment of betrayal. It was a strange, hollow feeling, not sadness, not even anger yet, just nothing, a complete and total void. The sandwich, my offering of love, slipped from my numb fingers. The bag hit the gleaming hardwood floor with a wet final thud. That sound shattered their private world. Two heads whipped around in perfect guilty synchronicity. The expressions on their faces will haunt me forever. Ethan's face drained of all color, his eyes wide with a kind of primal terror I'd never seen. Chloe let out a choked sob, scrambling to pull the sheet up to her chin, her face a twisted mask of shock. "Olivia," Ethan stammered, his voice a pathetic croak. "Olivia, wait, you don't understand." It was the most insulting thing he could have possibly said, as if I were a child, as if my own eyes were not to be trusted. I refused to give them the drama they expected. They didn't deserve my tears or my screams. They deserved my cold, calculated fury. I simply turned my back on the wreckage, my spine as straight and rigid as a steel rod, and walked out of the apartment. I walked out of his life. I walked out on the future I had so carefully painted. Each step felt impossibly heavy, yet paradoxically light. The dream was dead, but in its place something new and terrible was being forged. Pure crystalline rage. The next 24 hours were an exercise in controlled agony. I went back to my own apartment, locked the door, and allowed myself to shatter. I cried until my throat was raw and my body ached. The pain was a physical thing, a gaping wound where my heart had been. Every beautiful memory I had of Ethan was now tainted, spoiled. Every sisterly secret I had shared with Chloe was now a weapon she had used against me. They hadn't just cheated, they had conspired. They had collaborated in the desecration of our shared history. But as the sun rose on Friday morning, the day before my wedding, an eerie and profound calm settled over me. The grief had washed out, leaving behind a shoreline of cold, hard resolve. How dare they? How dare they think they could humiliate me, break me, and I would just crawl away to lick my wounds in private? My phone had been buzzing incessantly. Dozens of missed calls from Ethan, a torrent of texts begging for a chance to explain, filled with meaningless apologies. Chloe had sent just one, a single cowardly text. "I know I ruined everything. I'm so sorry, Olivia. Please, we have to talk." Talk? Oh, we were going to talk. It just wasn't going to be the quiet, tearful conversation they were hoping for. A plan began to form in the cold furnace of my mind. It was audacious. It was theatrical. It was the public reckoning they so richly deserved. The venue was paid for. The 5-course dinner was ordered. The guests were flying in from across the country. The stage was already set. They wanted a show. I was about to give them the performance of a lifetime. On Saturday morning, I woke up with the chilling focus of a predator. I moved through the day like a soldier preparing for battle. I took a long, hot shower, letting the water wash away the puffiness from my eyes. I sat in stoic silence as the hair and makeup artists worked their magic, transforming my grief-stricken face into the picture of a serene, glowing bride. I smiled a placid, distant smile at my mother, who was fluttering around me, her anxiety a palpable energy in the room. She knew something was off, that I was too quiet, but she chalked it up to wedding day jitters. Chloe, to my utter astonishment, had the gall to be there, playing her part as maid of honor. She moved like a ghost, her face pale and drawn, her eyes constantly darting to mine, pleading for some sign of forgiveness or mercy. When she reached out to help me with the tiny pearl buttons on the back of my gown, her hands were trembling violently. I met her gaze in the full-length mirror. The look I gave her was so devoid of emotion, so utterly empty of the sisterly love that had once defined us, that she flinched as if I'd struck her. She knew that I knew. She just had no idea what was coming next. Walking down the aisle of that magnificent historic church on Michigan Avenue was the most surreal and empowering moment of my life. My father, his face beaming with pride, was on my arm, completely unaware of the bomb I was about to detonate. The church was filled to capacity with our friends and family, the people who had watched our love story unfold, all here to witness its spectacular conclusion. I kept my eyes fixed on the altar where Ethan stood waiting. He didn't look like a groom. He looked like a man on death row, his face ashen, his smile a tight, desperate rictus. He was praying, I could tell, that I would just go through with it, that we could pretend this away. I took my place across from him. The glorious sound of the organ faded, and a reverent hush fell over the congregation. The minister began his speech, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling as he spoke of love, trust, and fidelity. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Finally, he arrived at the pivotal moment. "And now," he declared, his voice full of warmth, "if anyone here can show just cause why this man and this woman should not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." A perfect, breathless silence filled the air, and then slowly, deliberately, I raised my hand. A single, collective gasp echoed through the church. It was a beautiful sound. My father, who had just placed my hand in Ethan's, froze in confusion. Hundreds of heads swiveled in my direction. Ethan looked like he had been shot. I took a deep, steadying breath and turned to face our assembled guests. "I can," I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong, shattering the stunned silence. "I have a reason." I let the shock ripple through the crowd for a moment before I continued. "It seems that my fiancé, Ethan, has a rather progressive interpretation of his wedding vows. Specifically, the part about forsaking all others. You see, I discovered 2 nights ago that his preferred method of dealing with pre-wedding stress is to sleep with another woman." A low roar of whispers and murmurs erupted from the pews. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horrified understanding. Ethan began to sputter, trying to form a denial, but I held up a hand, silencing him with a single sharp gesture. "Please, Ethan, don't insult our guest's intelligence. I'm not finished," I said, my voice dripping with poisonous sweetness. "Because you see, he wasn't just unfaithful. That would have been a simple, almost boring betrayal. No, he chose his accomplice very carefully. He chose the one person in the world whose betrayal would cut the deepest. The one person who has been smiling in my face for months, helping me plan this very event. He chose my maid of honor. He chose my sister Chloe." I angled my head to look directly at the front pew where Chloe sat. She looked like a statue carved from salt, her face completely white, tears of pure, unadulterated shame streaming down her cheeks. My father slowly turned his head to look at her, and the expression on his face wasn't anger. It was a look of profound, soul-crushing disappointment, 1,000 times more brutal than any scream could ever be. "Now I understand this all sounds very dramatic," I announced to the captivated audience, "and in times like these, you need proof." With a theatrical flourish, I reached into a hidden pocket sewn inside my dress. I hadn't brought my phone. I had come prepared. I pulled out a small stack of glossy 8x10 photographs and held them up. I had these printed yesterday. Exhibit A, a series of text messages where they arranged their secret meetings while I was at my final gown fitting. Exhibit B, their discussion of how they would manage me after the honeymoon, very thoughtful, and for the grand finale. I paused, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable. I held up the final photo. It was a selfie they had taken, together, in his bed, the bed I had found them in. The church erupted into utter chaos. My mother was sobbing. Ethan's parents looked like they wanted the floor to open up and swallow them whole. Finally, I turned back to the shell of the man I was supposed to marry. I looked directly into his panicked, guilty eyes. "So, Ethan," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that still carried to the very back of the church, to answer the minister's question, "No, I will not marry you. I will not waste another second of my life on a man so weak, so deceitful, so utterly pathetic." Then, I shifted my gaze to my sister one last time. "And Chloe, I hope he was worth it. You didn't just lose a sister today, you lost everything." With that, I let my pristine white bouquet drop to the floor between us. I turned my back on the smoldering ruins of my life, and with my head held high, I walked back down that long aisle alone. As I reached the massive oak doors, a strange sound began to ripple through the chaos. It started as a few scattered claps, then grew into a wave of applause from our guests. I pushed open the doors and stepped out of the cathedral's darkness and into the bright Chicago sunshine, not as a broken bride, but as a woman who had just taken back her power. The war was far from over, but for the first time in 48 hours, I could finally breathe again.